Okay, so good morning. We are super glad that you are joining us this morning for this vegetable gardening webinar. This is kind of a new way for us to do programming, but I can see it being part of our future. Even when things get back to regular gatherings, I can see this being kind of a piece of what we do. So we're excited to do this morning, and I hope you'll forgive me if anything is a little awkward in my delivery this way. This is kind of the first time I've done a webinar rather than an in-person program on vegetable gardening. And I want you to know, for housekeeping, before we get started, that my co-host here is Josie Davis, and Josie is our County Extension 4-H agent here in Paulding County. I am Mary Carol Sheffield, and I'm the County Extension Agent for Ag and Natural Resources. And we have set everybody to mute and turned all the cameras off to kind of reduce feedback and allow the slides in the presentation to be the focus. So I will start my slideshow, and you should see it. There you go. We are also going to be recording, and currently, actually, I've already started the recording, so it is happening now. Because we've muted everybody, what we want you to do is, if you could put your questions in the chat. What we'll do is Josie is going to monitor that chat, and at the end we're going to go through and Josie will read some of the questions, and we'll see if we can't answer them. And if there are some questions that we can't answer, then we will get back to folks on those. We'll also send every participant an email after the webinar with a link to resources that are relevant to the webinar. There's some things you're going to see today that I think you're going to want to have access to, so I've already got a plan to get those out to you after the webinar. And there'll also be a quick survey, and we'd love it if you could complete the survey about the webinar and about your interests and topics for upcoming webinars, in case we decide to do some more of these, which I think we likely will over the summer. So with that, we'll get started. If you missed any part of it, if you get logged out, don't fret. I will be posting the recording to our Facebook page and potentially to our YouTube page. I got to navigate that a little bit, but I'm super excited you're here, and we're going to talk this morning about vegetable gardening. So, get my slide to go. There we go. So, while we're all spending a lot more time at home as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, planting a garden or a container garden is a great activity to plan for families. It's outside, and so you get fresh air. It's active, so you're moving. It's educational, because I can promise that you are going to learn a whole lot while you're gardening throughout the season. And it's edible, and it's healthy, which is great. So with some grocery stores taking longer than usual to stock items, vegetable gardening is a great way to help keep your refrigerator stocked this summer. For those who've never considered growing their own vegetables, it might seem a little bit overwhelming, but it's actually a pretty simple process to start. And I want you to have realistic expectations that some things will probably go great and some things might not go as well as you hope they will. But I hope that I'll arm you with a little information today so that it can go as well as it can, and that you can have a positive gardening experience. So I'm gonna poll everybody. I want to know who we have here and whether you already grow a vegetable garden. So if you can answer that for me, that would be great. And I'll give you a few seconds to answer. Okay, I'm going to wrap the poll in about 5 seconds here, because it looks like a lot of people have answered. Okay, and I'm going to share the results with you. We have a lot of gardeners with us, but we also have a few people who haven't done it before who are probably interested to learn a little bit more. So about 80% of folks in the webinar already grow a vegetable garden, but about 20% don't. And so this is a good opportunity for us to chat about what works and what's easy and what options there are. All right. So, as we think about gardening, one of the first things you have to do is choose a site. And one of the really important things about choosing a site is that it has enough sunlight to grow vegetables. Vegetables need at least 8 hours of sunlight a day. 10 would be great. In this slide, you can see a full sun site on the left and a site that's a little too shady on the right. You also probably want a location that's pretty convenient to your house and a water supply. And the soil should be pretty good textured and well drained. And you want to avoid sites that have a history of hard to control weeds like nutsedge and Bermuda grass. All vegetables require full sun to grow properly. And vegetables grown in the shade, like that garden on the right, are going to be leggy, and they're going to have fewer flowers and a lot less yield than if they were grown in the sun. So keep in mind that a large tree can cast a big shadow, especially in the spring and fall when we're starting gardening. Ideally, the garden site won't have any adjacent trees to the south side of the garden. And if possible, you want to, when you're choosing your site, you might want to go out and kind of watch the movement of the sun from hour to hour across the site so that you really know what kind of sunlight availability you have. One of the things after you've chosen a site that you want to do is you want to plan your garden out on paper first. For small areas, you're going to select crops that you like best, and you can think about using dwarf or compact varieties that'll produce an adequate supply on a few plants. You can also plan to use space continuously by planting another season in-season crops soon after the last harvest is complete. Some of your vegetable garden plants may be spent before the end of the growing season, and there are plants that you can put in behind them that you can get another crop off of. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. You want to plant tall growing plants together on the north or the west side of the garden so they won't shade the lower growing plants. And you want to make a map like this hand-drawn map that helps you know where you plant, where your vegetables are planted, not because you're not going to know when you look out at your garden, but because you want this for your records so that when next year you're planting your garden, you can rotate your crops, because that's really important when it comes to managing pests and making sure that you don't have problems in the future. It's important to rotate your crops each year. You also want to plan for space to walk between rows and walk down to harvest the crop and maintain and cultivate the beds. The amount of space that you have available kind of dictates the size of your garden. And even very small gardens can produce a surprising quantity of vegetables and easily feed a family. So right now, if we're at this point in the season and you haven't put your garden in yet, I would suggest purchasing transplants of tomatoes. If you started early, you could start plants from seeds in February and March. But if you're starting now with tomatoes, peppers, and eggplants, I would just go ahead and buy transplants from a greenhouse. Those crops don't establish easily if they're planted directly in the ground from seed. So it's important that those transplants go in rather than seeds. There are a lot of vegetables, though, that you can plant directly from seed now, including squash and corn, cucumbers and beans, okra and melons. Those can be direct seeded right into your garden, and you're going to have a lot of success with that. Right now, the soil is warm, we're getting good rainfall, so it's a good time to do that. It's also good to measure your garden and record its measurements on that plan, and hold on to that plan for those crop rotation in future seasons. Having those measurements will help you calculate your fertilizer needs and help you calculate how many plants or seeds you need for a certain area that you're planning to plant. There are a lot of ways that you can garden. You can use in-ground beds, you can use containers, you can use raised beds, you can even grow vegetables in a straw bale. There are advantages and disadvantages to each method. What you choose to do depends really on your space and your mobility, your budget, and whatever other gardening factors come into play for you. You just want to consider what's going to be your best option for growing in your environment. So it's extension, and we wouldn't be extension if we didn't talk to you about soil testing. It's an important practice for home gardeners. Soil test results indicate the amount of residual fertilizers in your soil and the amounts of fertilizers you should add to get the best growth out of your vegetable garden. A soil test will also determine the pH of your soil, which is the basis for liming recommendations. And if your pH is too low or too high, it can be tough to grow some of the things that you want to grow. Most vegetables do best in slightly acid soil with a pH of around 6.0 to 6.5. Vegetables grow really poorly in more acid soil with a pH of 4.5 to 5.5. If you're growing in our native soil, a lot of times your pH will be somewhere in that 4.5 to 5.5 range. So that's why this test can help you get that soil pH up and determine the best way to do it. When you get your soil test results, it'll give you a recommendation. Dolomitic lime is usually what we recommend to neutralize acidity because that form of lime supplies some other nutrients like magnesium and calcium that we sometimes find are deficient in our soils in Georgia. So how do you take a soil sample? It's pretty easy. You need a clean trowel and a clean bucket so that you don't contaminate the sample with fertilizer or lime. And you want to go out to your garden, and you can see in this drawing, there's a vegetable garden delineated here, and it's got all these little dots, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 dots. So I say take 8 to 10 subsamples randomly from your garden area, just like on that little map. Walk through, choose a spot. When you take the subsample, what you'll do is take your trowel and take a slice of soil from the top of the soil where the plants would grow out down 4 to 6 inches, which is the space the roots would grow in, and put them in that bucket and do that 8 or 10 times. And as you do that, you're just going to mix them together so that they represent the whole garden. Once you have the sample, you can bring it to our office at 530 West Memorial Drive in Dallas, along with the $9 fee for the sample. And you're going to tell us what you're going to grow. And it'll take about 7 to 10 business days to get your soil test results. I'm going to talk a little bit at the end about a drop box that we have that you can put that soil in, because right now we're still kind of doing as much as we can contactless. So there are options for that at the office as well. We can email you your soil test results or mail them to you by snail mail. You'll get them faster by email, but this is what they'll look like. It includes a lovely graph that everybody always looks at and says, okay, but what does that mean? So what it shows you in that graph is the nutrient content of your soil, and it shows on there the pH. And you can see nutrient content is on the left. We got phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium, and zinc. And then on the right, we have the pH. And in this case, this soil sample had a pH of 5.5. So it says lime needed, but if you go down to the bottom, these recommendations, it tells you exactly how much lime you need per 1,000 square feet of garden to get that pH and the recommended pH of 6.0 to 6.5. It also tells you some other amendments that you can add to improve nutrition in your garden, including sulfur or gypsum and a fertilizer recommendation. So that's all there, and very nice and neat. And you can use that for a couple of years. And it's always a good idea after a couple of years of following that recommendation to do another soil test. I would always say only use the lime recommendation once, and don't lime again until you test your soil and get another lime recommendation. So it's important to know a little bit about fertilizers as you approach your garden. Fertilizers are sold by their grade. For example, in this picture, there is a 13, 13, 13. And those numbers refer to the percent of nitrogen is the first number, the percent of phosphorus is the second number, and the percent of potassium is the third number. So for example, if this was a 100-pound bag of 13, 13, 13, there are 13 pounds of nitrogen, which is N, 13 pounds of phosphorus, which is represented by P, and 13 pounds of soluble potassium, which is represented by a K. And that totals in that 100-pound bag 39 pounds of plant nutrients. The other 61 pounds just consist of either other micronutrients, fillers, and sometimes soil conditioners, depending on the fertilizer that you buy. So what are those fertilizers? What do they do? A handy way to remember what each fertilizer nutrient does is the saying, fertilizing for shoots, roots, and fruits. If you can remember shoots, roots, and fruits, and NPK for those nutrients, then you can remember that N, nitrogen, promotes the growth of shoots, meaning the stems, branches, and leaves of a plant. Phosphorus promotes strong and healthy root systems, and potassium supports fruit production. Supplying the three main plant nutrients in the right amounts can contribute to the best productivity in your vegetable garden. So how do you apply fertilizer? That's a little bit up to the gardener and what works best for them in their garden layout. You can broadcast fertilizer at the start of your season when you're putting your garden in and working in the soil with your tiller or your garden implements. That's probably not the most efficient way for the plants to use it, but that will work. You could also broadcast half of it and work it in before you plant the garden, and then apply the remainder of it a few weeks after you plant the garden by side dressing it in 3-inch bands to either side of the row and slightly kind of at root level for the plants. Or you can even apply a third of it at a time. Start by broadcasting a third, apply a third a couple of weeks later, and the other third another couple of weeks later. If you do those side dressings at 2 to 3 week intervals after the plants are well established, that will help get the plants off to a good start and make kind of the most efficient use of fertilizer without losing that nitrogen, because nitrogen has a tendency to volatilize into the atmosphere. A helpful tool is a scale. A simple garden scale can help you not apply too much fertilizer, especially when you're side dressing, because too much fertilizer placed near young plants or seeds can damage their little root systems before they get mature. Because it requires a really small amount of fertilizer for short rows and small plots that we have in most home vegetable gardens, it's easy to apply too much if you don't weigh or measure the amount specified. So if you invest in an inexpensive kitchen scale, you'll find that's a handy tool for your garden, and you can use it for a lot of purposes, really. A pint of commercial fertilizer weighs about 1 pound, and side dressing refers to the practice of placing fertilizer in the soil beside your plants to provide that additional plant food, which is usually needed across the growing season. That side dressing allows the plant food to move gradually into the area of the roots and prevents it from burning, as long as you don't apply too much. You don't want the fertilizer to come in direct contact with the leaves of your plants, because it can definitely burn that way. So this chart is one of the things that I'm going to send you after the presentation. And actually, this chart is several pages long. I know it's hard to see on here. I was just using it kind of as an example, but it lists all of the vegetables, their average days to maturity. You can get that information from the plant label or the seed packet. Some cultivars that do well in Georgia, the general planting dates where we live, and a recommendation for seeds or plants per 100 foot and the spacing of the plants. So this is a really handy chart. It lists a lot of things, and you can grow, what you're going to learn from this chart is that you can grow a crop just about all year round here in Georgia. But some plants are considered warm season crops and others are considered cool season crops. So right now you want to make sure that you're growing warm season crops. For warm season crops, they all should be planted after the danger of frost in spring. And for cool season crops, you can plant either in fall or late winter. Our average first frost in Georgia that you'll have to be thinking about at the end of this summer gardening season, we usually average about a November 1st frost. It can come earlier or it can come later, because that is just an average. And our average last frost in Georgia is around April 10th, or in this part of Georgia is around April 10th. Many years it's earlier. This year it was a little bit earlier, but we did have a scare later. We've had some pretty cool temperatures in May. But I always tell people to pay their taxes and then plant their tomatoes. I say April 15th is a good date to start thinking about planting those tender annual vegetables. In mid-January, you can plant snow peas and potatoes. Starting in April, you can plant tomatoes, cucumbers, melons, string beans, corn, peppers, squash, okra, and eggplant. But no worries, you're not too late. You can plant those things up into June, and some of those crops you can even plant in July and still get a little crop off before the end of the season. In September through November, you can think about another batch of string beans before that last frost. And you can also plant some of those cold tolerant vegetables like collard and mustard and turnip greens, broccoli, cabbage, Swiss chard, lettuce, garlic, onions, and spinach. Those are all great fall, winter crops. Determining how much of each vegetable you should plant in your garden can sometimes be confusing, and that's why this chart is helpful. But some of that has to be based on your own needs and your family and what y'all like to eat from the vegetable garden, and whether you plan to preserve any of it for later. So available garden space is another consideration when you think about how much you are going to grow. I will admit that I have been known to overplant my vegetable garden, but when it comes to that, you need to put a little more thought in how much you truly need. This is a resource that can help you plan your planting, and it is going to go out after the webinar, so you'll have a chance to kind of delve into it and take a look. But I want to talk about a few guidelines to help you plan the perfect garden and keep you supplied with fresh vegetables throughout the season. 1 or 2 cherry tomatoes will supply a family of 4 for the entire growing season. If you're planting more than that, you're probably going to need somebody to help you harvest all those little bitty cherry tomatoes and take them with them. Banana peppers kind of fall in that same category. You can have 2 plants and that'll do you pretty good. Sweet peppers, like bell peppers, trickle out a few peppers each week once they start producing. So 3 to 5 plants would probably be about right for a family of 4. When it comes to growing larger tomatoes, consider what you plan to do with them. If you are going to think about making salsa or sauce, then you probably want to plant some determinate varieties like Rutgers or Celebrity or any of the Romas. But if you just want to have a few each week for sandwiches and hamburgers or salads, then plant a few indeterminate varieties like Better Boy, Beefsteak, Best Boy, Early Girl, or Cherokee Purple. The advantage of the determinate varieties is that they produce all in a short period of time and then they're done. And that allows you to quickly harvest, and then you can can them or make your sauces. And then you can pull the plants and maybe plant a late season crop. You want to consider staggering your bean plantings. Green bean plantings, maybe 2 weeks apart for 3 or 4 weeks will help you make it through the summer with a fresh harvest. And a few 10 to 15 foot rows can supply you for most of the summer. I think bush beans are a little easier to plant than pole beans because they don't need any structural support, but they do require you to bend over a little further to harvest them. So that kind of depends a little bit on your preference. Both yellow squash and zucchini squash are fast developing plants, and they'll continue to produce as long as they stay healthy. I don't plant all my squash at once. I stagger those so that every few weeks there's a young crop coming behind. And 3 to 4 hills of squash at each planting is probably about right to sustain evening meals for a family if that's what you're going to use them for. If you want to plant corn, you're going to need to plan your space really carefully. It needs to be planted in rows. You need at least 3 rows because it is wind pollinated. So how much you plant actually depends on your goal and how much space you have really. You can plant it in a small block in a small garden, but you want to have at least 3 rows. And you probably want to have those rows to be about at least 6 feet long if you can. If you want to plant a larger block and you have a lot of space with the intention of creaming corn and storing it in the freezer, then you can plant 4 rows and make them 25 feet long, and you'll get a pretty good harvest of that. You can stagger corn too if you want to harvest fresh over the season. You can plant a couple of crops every couple of weeks. And work with it that way, because corn is going to come in kind of all at once and you're going to harvest it all at once, and then you can let the stalks dry and use them later for decorations or throw them out and start again. The final vegetable that I'll talk about is cucumbers. There is nothing quite like a fresh cucumber. It is far superior to what you're going to get at the grocery store. Cucumbers, though, can take up a lot of space because they sprawl like squash does, and they vine. So I grow my cucumbers vertically up a tomato cage, and that makes it a little easier for me to maintain them and to harvest them. And 3 or 4 hills of cucumbers will be enough at the base of one tomato cage to keep you guessing what you can do with all the cucumbers you're going to get. But there are a lot of other summer vegetables you might want to consider planting. But the key is probably to think about how often you want to eat them. And if you like to prepare them for long-term storage, that'll definitely impact how much you should grow. If you plant too much, you might find the option is there to donate your extra to the local food bank. Like here in Dallas, we have Helping Hands, and they take produce donations from vegetable gardeners if they have extra. So let's talk a little bit about watering. Our state climatologist, Pam Knox, predicts that we are going to have a rather warm, rather wet spring. So that might reduce your need to water too much. But it's important to think about watering and how you're going to do it. How much water your garden needs is going to vary depending a little bit on soil type and the stage of growth of the plants, the amount of rainfall we're getting, and the temperature outside. But most vegetable gardens need 1 to 1.5 inches of rain per week or water per week during the growing season. You want to water often enough to keep the moisture level fairly uniform. On medium and heavy soils, an application of about 1 inch a week should be adequate in the absence of rainfall. And it's best applied at the soil level. You can use drip tape, you can use a soaker hose. You can see in this picture here at the Master Gardener Garden that we used to have a Master Gardener Garden here at the office. We've had some construction, it's not there, but this is a historic photo, and we always use soaker hoses to apply water to our plants. If you decide to use a sprinkler, you may find that you have more disease problems because leaf wetting opens plants up to increased opportunities for the spread of infection through fungal diseases and the movement of spores. So it's not, it's not that you can't water with a sprinkler, but you got to expect that you may see some more damage to your plants from diseases in that scenario. For weed control, there are a lot of things to think about because in your vegetable garden, you can't easily use chemical weed control without posing a risk to your own plants that you don't want to damage. So some good practices include mulching. Using pine straw or wheat straw, compost will all be good mulches. If you have some other source of wood chips that are well composted, that could be a good mulch, and they help to do several things beyond just weed control. They help conserve moisture, and they also help to reduce the need to cultivate to prevent weeds because they hold back some of the weed seed germination. If you apply enough mulch to have 2 to 4 inches after settling, you're going to control a lot of weeds that way. You can also, as an extra added layer of weed control, put down 3 sheets of newspaper underneath your mulch, and it will really reduce weed competition. It will decay across the season, and it'll help you not have to do so much cultivation. But weeds are going to be inevitable, and even if you do the best mulching job, you're going to have some things pop up, so you got to be out there scouting for those weeds. And a weed is any plant in your garden that isn't intentional because it's competing with your garden for nutrients, water, sun, and space. When it comes to weeds in the vegetable garden, prevention with good mulching, followed by hard work of hand pulling and cultivation, are the best ways to reduce weed competition. Cultivate or hoe the garden as often as you need to control weeds and grasses. A long-handled hoe or a scuffle hoe is an easy way to keep weeds at bay, but you don't want to cultivate too deeply because you can injure the roots on your plants, and that can be a problem for reproduction. Cultivating too often can also dry out your soil. So think about doing weed control early when weeds are small and the roots aren't very deep. So inevitably, one of the things you're going to learn when you vegetable garden is you're going to have an entomology lesson. You are going to see insects that you may have never seen before. Now, these are some insect pests that you are likely to encounter. Here at the top right are aphids. Some people call those plant lice. This is a tomato hornworm or tomato fruit worm. These are whiteflies, and these are squash bugs. There are other enemies in your garden that include pickle worms and wireworms, spider mites and Mexican bean beetles, leaf hoppers and corn earworms, and the Colorado potato beetle. In your home garden, it is going to be important for you to get out there regularly and inspect your plants and take a look and make sure that everything's going okay. Good horticultural practices can cut down on the need for chemical controls of some of these pests. Check the entire plant, including the underside of the leaves, for evidence of these pests. You also are going to learn about beneficial insects in your garden because they're going to be important to you. And because insecticides are not selective, meaning that you can't just kill the pests and not kill the beneficials, it's really important to know and recognize these beneficial insects and kind of be patient with some of the things that naturally, organically happen in your garden. Even organic insecticides are still going to be toxic to all insects rather than just a specific insect. These beneficials can help you with pest management. Spiders and ladybugs eat pests. This is the eggs of a braconid wasp laid on a tomato hornworm. They lay these parasitic wasp eggs, and that hornworm's not long for this world. And then bumblebees and carpenter bees and honeybees and even little flies really help our productivity in our gardens through helping us with pollination. So if you truly have a pest problem and you feel like you've got to turn to an insecticide, I would start with something like insecticidal soap or neem oil. And you know, if you're having a really tough time and you can't get control of that, then you could think about moving to an insecticide with longer residual times, only if those contact insecticides don't work. No insecticide is selective. So even those contact insecticides, if you spray a spider, are going to kill the spider if they make contact with it. But you can minimize the risk to beneficial insects by applying them at times when pollinators are not actively foraging, and by spraying contact insecticides only directly on the pests you're trying to control. I want to make one note about insecticidal soaps. I often talk to people and they want to mix up their own insecticidal soap, and I don't recommend homemade insecticidal soap because you can do damage to your plants with that. I would suggest purchasing a specially formulated insecticidal soap that won't harm your plants but will help you control insects that you need to control. The household soaps that people use and make homemade ones with can have a lot of sudsing agents in them that are disruptive to plant cells. And so you might be successful at killing your pest with that, but you also might kill your plant without meaning to. So there's some diseases that you can be on the lookout for in your garden. Many foliage and soil-borne diseases attack vegetables, and they have to be controlled or prevented in order to obtain good yields and high quality fruits. Using those best practices like mulching and watering at the soil level will produce stronger plants and give you less opportunities for infection to occur, but you can't control rainfall, and leaf wetting is kind of the primary culprit in the spread of disease. So do everything you can to avoid leaf wetting. Don't water late in the day because that doesn't give as much time for the plant leaves to dry out. If you can water early in the morning, maybe even before the sun rises when there'd be dew on the plants anyway, that doesn't increase the length of time that the plants are wet, and that reduces the opportunity for disease. Leaf wetting is that critical factor in disease infection, and an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, because once a plant is infected and looks like the ones that you see on your screen here, this is powdery mildew, this looks to me like a virus in a squash plant, and this is early blight on tomato. Fungicides won't cure those things. They will only protect uninfected plants and uninfected growth to help reduce infection. So sometimes if you get an infection, a plant infected like this, and you have one plant in a row of 5 plants, it might be better to sacrifice the plant that has the disease and concentrate your effort on the ones that are still healthy. So harvesting, now we get to the part everybody's excited about, actually getting something from that garden. It's important to harvest at the right time, not and at the proper stage of maturity. You don't want to harvest too early, and definitely don't want to harvest too late. If you harvest at the right time, a lot of times you can get more fruit production happening, because it tells the plant when you take the fruits off to put more energy into producing flowers and fruits again. Things like okra have to be harvested every 2 or 3 days, or some pods will get really big and be too tough to use. And it'll also slow down the production of the plant of new pods. You want to harvest when the foliage is dry so that you, again, reduce that opportunity to spread disease. And you don't want to damage foliage by stepping on vines or breaking stems and opening wounds that can cause disease organisms and opening in the plant. Don't harvest when the plant is wilted, because that can cause an injury and also increase water loss to the plant. And you want to make sure that you keep your freshly harvested produce in the shade or move it someplace cool pretty quickly to preserve the quality. Things like green beans deteriorate really quickly if they're not kept cool. You want to use freshly harvested produce as soon as possible to preserve its quality. So if you can harvest only what you need or can preserve immediately, that will be helpful. And when you're harvesting, you want to gently remove the the part to be harvested from the plant, and take care not to unnecessarily injure any part of the plant, because that will weaken it. And the ultimate goal of all this, of course, is, lunch. I'm looking forward to that first tomato that comes from my garden, and slicing it up and having myself a tomato sandwich. That is one of the true joys of summer, in my opinion, as a vegetable gardener. So that concludes my content portion, but I wanted to let everybody know that Master Gardeners have a plant sale every year. Some of you may be familiar with this in Paulding County. And we weren't able to have it this year due to the pandemic, but we already had plants growing, some annuals and some tomato plants, and we still have a few. We had an internal plant sale, and Master Gardeners purchased some plants from themselves. But today we're beginning an honor system plant sale with the remaining tomato plants at the office. And if you would like to purchase a plant, what you'll do is come by and keep your social distance. If anybody else is here, the plants are out in the side yard on a bench and a shelf, and you can peruse them. And you will place your purchase money into the big green mailbox on the front porch. You can leave a check, or you can leave cash if it's during the day and we're here and we'll see it and we'll grab it quickly. If we're not here, I would not recommend leaving cash. If we're not here and you're not comfortable leaving check or cash, you can leave a note for us to call you at a phone number to collect your payment via credit or debit card, and we can do that when we get in. Tomato plants are available in limited quantities. They are $2 a plant. We have some early girls, some sweet 100s. The sweet 100s already have little fruits on them. We have some Boxcar Willie, a few Rutgers, Beefmaster, and Best Boy. And we have just a few annual plants, some spider plants, and petunias and begonias. They are very limited quantities. We are not doing any holds. So that is just our little plug. I also wanted you to know that if you are growing a garden and you're interested in learning about canning and preserving, that Fulton County Extension is offering a series on preserving the taste of summer at 6 o'clock on upcoming Thursday evenings. They've got salsa this week, which is tomorrow night. They've got pickling on June 4th, and they've got pressure canning. So I will include a registration link if you're interested in that and want to sign up for those. And it'll be sort of like this, a Zoom webinar where you'll get instruction and be able to ask some questions via chat. And it'll be a lot like this. I hope that maybe they are posting those online, but I don't know that for sure. If they are, they did one on jams and jellies last week. So if you look at the Fulton County Facebook page, you might see that. So with that, that sums it up. Josie, do we have some questions?
Yeah, Mary Carol, we do have some questions, and I'm going to go in order that they were asked in the chat box. The first one being, we had a couple of questions about lettuce, can it be grown in a container in our area without bolting? And then we have one guest that says that their lettuce is already bolting, and is that normal?
Yes, it is normal for lettuce. My lettuce in my garden is bolting right now too. It is a cool season crop. As soon as temperatures get warm, it's going to start to put on those flowers and go to seed. So it's going to bolt right now. That's pretty common. And also, yes, you can grow lettuce in a container. You're going to have better luck with lettuce come fall. So I would, if you've got lettuce right now and it's bolting, I would pull it and replace it with a warm season crop. And I would think about getting ready to plant some new lettuce seed, maybe in mid to late August, early September, so that you can have a fall crop.
Perfect. So our next question, Ronald was asking if you have a recipe for making your own seed starter soil.
Ronald, I do not have a recipe for my own seed starter. I buy it, but you can make your own with like make your own soilless mixture with like vermiculite, perlite. And I feel certain that there's probably an extension recipe for that if you're doing a lot of seed starting. And I can look for that and shoot that out in our follow-up.
Perfect. Next on, Elizabeth was just asking real quick, can you repeat some of the items that could be planted right now? I also know that I think you're going to send out a list of those items.
I am. I'm going to send the vegetable planting chart for Georgia. But some of the things that are great right now from transplants would be like buy a plant that's already started for tomatoes, peppers, and eggplant. You could right now start from seed cucumbers, squash, melons, okra. Probably I'm missing something from my list there, beans. Anything in those families, you could easily start now from seed.
Perfect. So Judy had a question when you talked about being able to plant in straw bales. Are they chemically treated? Do you have to be concerned about that? And where would be the best place to purchase a straw bale?
Okay, so I cannot speak to whether they've not been treated with anything, but I can say that most straw bales aren't going to have any herbicide residues, which would be my biggest concern for a vegetable garden. And it does need to be wheat straw. You don't want to use like a hay bale intended for animal feed, but wheat straw that you might use for mulch otherwise. I have bought wheat straw at Elrod Garden Center here locally. You can get it at the box stores. I've bought it at Home Depot and Lowe's before. I will tell you that right now there is a high demand for all of this. When I go to the garden centers, they are teeming with people because people are looking for ways to get out and things to do in their own yard. But if you can acquire some wheat straw bales, there is a conditioning method that you need to do before you plant them to help them start breaking down before you plant. So you basically add some fertilizer, water it in, wait a few days, add some more fertilizer, water it in, wait a few days, and you take their temperature. And I have a little series on our Facebook page about my straw bale gardens. I'd never done it before this year, so it was sort of an experiment, but it's going pretty good right now. I would recommend it for small spaces, and also it might be good for increasing accessibility because it lifts it up a little bit, but they do start to decay and they start to shrink a little bit.
Perfect. And you may have just covered this, I'm so sorry, but what are some other recommendations for vegetables that can be planted in pots?
Pretty much any vegetable that you can grow in summer, you could grow in a pot. But if you're going to grow something like a tomato in a pot, then you probably want to grow one of the determinate varieties. That's called it's going to be bushier in stature. It's not going to get as tall, and it won't need a cage. You could put a cage on a container, or you could stake it. It might be easier to stake it in a container, but it's not going to get quite as tall as, say, one of your indeterminate Better Boy varieties, or one of your cherry tomatoes that can get like 8 feet tall. You want to choose one of those indeterminate varieties. But you can also easily grow some varieties of cucumbers. There are small ones that that are kind of bush cucumbers and bush beans. Okra can be grown in a container. You might want to grow multiple okra plants for good pollination if you're going to grow in containers. But almost anything. Probably it would be tough to grow melons in a container, and it might be tough to grow squash in a container, but you could grow squash on a hay bale or straw bale, excuse me.
All right, so we do have a few questions about watering. One is just, can you repeat how much water vegetables and fruit production needs per week? And then also, do you know how much water, like a drip hose, typically provides an hour?
So that's a really good question. And it's going to be really variable depending on not just the hose and the nozzle heads, but also it's going to depend on the water pressure at your house. So that's something that you would almost have to test out, and you could probably do that by attaching your drip hose or your soaker hose and putting it in a bucket and timing it for 10, 15 minutes and seeing what volume of water it's putting out in that time period in that 5-gallon bucket, and kind of calculate based on that how many gallons per minute it's putting out. I would say that the amount of water for our area, we always say between 1 inch and 1.5 inches a week. If we get that much rainfall, that we're good. For us, probably 1 inch is adequate, because even though our clay soil is compacted and hard to work in, that's the thing that it's really good at, is it holds moisture really well. So that, if we get 1 inch of rainfall in a week, you probably don't have to provide a lot of additional water to your garden.
Perfect. And we are coming up to the end of our questions, but we do have a few. One, it was about our insects in the garden. One, do you recommend purchasing ladybugs for the garden? And also, it was just a comment about a surprise thought that carpenter bees were beneficial pollinators.
Yeah, I think that surprises a lot of people, because a lot of people do think they can be a pest on wood surfaces, but they are a pollinator as well. So they're just like people. They're complex beings. They can do more than one thing. In terms of ladybugs, I think it's fun to buy ladybugs and visit with them, but I don't recommend it as a pest control strategy, because I feel like you can't really contain them in a specific space where you want them. And when you release them, you don't have any guarantees that they're going to stay in your garden or go somewhere else. So I don't recommend that as a tried and true pest control strategy, but I would encourage you to appreciate the ones that are there, and also get to know what they look like at different stages in their life, because they, as a larvae, they don't look anything like the beetle, but as a larvae, they're still a very effective pest control. So I encourage you to Google ladybug larvae if you don't know what that looks like.
Awesome. One last question. If anybody else has a question, go ahead and type that in the chat box. But we had one come in, just curiosity, can you freeze spinach that you grow?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm not sure what the answer is. That's a family and consumer science kind of food safety question. And I haven't frozen spinach, but obviously commercially they freeze spinach and we buy it. So there's probably a way to do that. And I'll go look and see if we have a publication about it. Also we'll send you guys a link. I'm going to send you like the craziest email when this is over. But there's a great website called the National Home Food Preservation website, and it's run by Extension. It's housed here in Georgia. I'll look there and see if I can find anything, but I'll send you guys a link to that in case you're interested in more food preservation info. It has tips and recipes and best practices for food safety, which is really important as you think about all of this.
Let's see, and Catherine just put her comment in there saying that she freezes it all the time just to make sure to layer it in a single layer. And then Michelle just asked, what is the best time to water?
The best time to water would probably be early in the morning, like around 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning. If you could set your vegetable garden on a timer, or if you're an early bird and you just want to go out and turn it on, you can. What that does is that means that if there is leaf wetting taking place, that then when the sun comes up and it starts to dry things out, it's not going to last as long. It's not going to stay wet as long as if you waited till 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock in the afternoon and got everything really wet, and then it was going to stay wet all night as the sun went down. That's an introduction of disease. But also watering in the morning gives the plants a chance to take up and a good bit of water and be ready for a full day of photosynthesis to help them be more productive.
Perfect. And so far, we are at the end of our questions.
All right. Well, thanks so much, everybody, for joining us today. Master gardeners, if you are on, we are going to meet separately from this. So I'm going to end this meeting in just a few minutes, and I'll log into the Master Gardener meeting at 11. I want to thank Josie so much for helping me to moderate, and I appreciate everybody coming, and look for an email from me later today with some resources and a little survey. We'd love it if you could help us by filling out the survey and letting us know what other interests you have. Hope you guys have a great day.